Jason adjusted his tie as he prepared for yet another mundane day at work. His life, once filled with ambition and passion, had settled into a comfortable but unremarkable rhythm. He had no reason to suspect this day would be any different. Until he opened the drawer in their shared office space at home. His hand froze as he spotted 2 plane tickets tucked neatly beneath some papers. His name wasn't on either ticket. Instead, they were booked for Sophia, his wife of 15 years, and a man named Mark. Jason's heart thudded in his chest as he stared at the tickets. Mark. He'd heard the name before, in passing, a supposed colleague of Sophia's, the man she sometimes mentioned when talking about business trips or late meetings. Jason had brushed it off at the time, trusting her completely. Now, his mind raced with possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. His instincts took over. Sitting down at the computer, Jason began to dig. It wasn't difficult to find her email account, still logged in, and within moments he unearthed a chain of messages between Sophia and Mark. The content was damning, explicit plans for their escape, dripping with giddy excitement. Sophia had written about her relief at finally leaving the dull routine behind and starting fresh with Mark. Jason's fingers trembled, but his mind grew eerily calm. He scrolled further back in their exchanges, unearthing months of deceit. Weekend trips disguised as business conferences, shared expenses for clandestine dinners, and whispered promises of a life free from Jason. The betrayal cut deep, but Jason wasn't one to crumble under pressure. Years of handling high-stakes negotiations had taught him to compartmentalize, to strategize even in the face of personal devastation. He began taking screenshots of every message, every piece of evidence. He stopped at one email in particular. It was an itinerary Sophia had sent Mark for their upcoming getaway. She outlined her plans with precision, leaving early Saturday morning from Terminal 3, Flight 742 to Rome. Jason's breath hitched. Not only had she been planning to leave him, but she intended to take their shared savings to fund her new life. Jason's resolve hardened. If Sophia and Mark thought they could walk away unscathed, they were sorely mistaken. He would expose their betrayal, ensuring they faced not just his wrath, but also the judgment of the world around them. He glanced at his watch. He had 4 days until their flight, 4 days to prepare his counterstrike, and when the moment came, it would be public, unrelenting, and unforgettable. Jason stood in the quiet kitchen, the faint hum of the refrigerator the only sound. The betrayal roared in his ears, but he channeled the turmoil into focus. Sophia and Mark's duplicity wouldn't go unnoticed, and he wouldn't allow them the satisfaction of a quiet escape. No, this wasn't going to end with hushed whispers or subdued tears. It was going to end where everyone could see. He sat at the table with his laptop, the folder of evidence open beside him. Every message, every email, and every receipt had been carefully saved and printed. He worked methodically, analyzing each piece for its potential impact. He wasn't just collecting proof, he was crafting a narrative, one that left no room for sympathy or doubt. Jason knew their flight details now. Saturday morning, Terminal 3. He'd be there early, not just to confront them, but to ensure the confrontation couldn't be brushed aside. If Sophia and Mark wanted to flaunt their new beginning, they would do it in front of the very people they had deceived. His first step was to enlist the help of his friend Peter, a savvy IT consultant who'd helped Jason secure his business in the past. Peter was the kind of man who thrived on challenges, and Jason's predicament sparked his interest immediately. Together, they crafted a plan to expose Sophia's actions without crossing legal boundaries. "This isn't just about catching her," Jason explained, his voice steady. "It's about making sure she can't twist the story or shift the blame." Peter nodded, typing rapidly on his laptop. "We'll set up a simple presentation. Visuals, timestamps, clear and indisputable. Keep it professional," Jason added. "No sensationalism, just the facts." As the hours ticked by, the two men created a digital timeline of Sophia's deceit, piecing together the months of betrayal in a format anyone could understand. Each email was linked to a date. Each receipt and photo was accompanied by a caption explaining its context. When it was finished, it wasn't just evidence. It was a story, one impossible to refute. But Jason wasn't done. He also prepared himself for the confrontation. He rehearsed what he would say, knowing he needed to stay composed. Sophia and Mark might try to provoke him, to paint him as unstable or bitter. He couldn't allow them the upper hand. On Thursday night, Jason took one last step. He reached out to Sophia's parents, Sarah and Gerald, who had always supported their marriage. They were the type to value honesty and integrity above all else. Jason's tone was calm as he explained the situation, sharing just enough details to ensure their presence at the airport. He didn't need to twist their arms. They were horrified by what they heard. The final pieces of the plan fell into place. By Friday night, Jason had ensured that not only would Sophia and Mark be publicly exposed, but they would also face the people they had betrayed most profoundly. Jason wasn't looking for revenge. He was ensuring the truth was undeniable. Saturday morning arrived with an overcast sky, casting a gray pall over the city. Jason stood at the entrance of the airport, clutching the folder of evidence tightly under his arm. His pulse was steady, his face an impassive mask. The past few days of meticulous planning had left no room for hesitation. Today was about action, and Jason was ready. As he stepped through the sliding glass doors of the terminal, the buzz of travelers swirled around him. Families hugging goodbye, business people rushing to gates, and couples sharing stolen moments before departures. It was the perfect stage for what was to come. Jason found a spot near the check-in counters where Sophia and Mark would have to pass. He had positioned himself deliberately, ensuring a clear view of their approach. Sophia's parents, Sarah and Gerald, stood to the side, their faces pale but resolute. Jason had briefed them thoroughly, and their support bolstered his resolve. It wasn't long before he spotted them. Sophia, dressed impeccably in a beige trench coat, her auburn hair swept into a sleek ponytail, walked beside Mark, who carried himself with a cocky swagger. Mark's tall frame and expensive wardrobe radiated confidence, but to Jason, it was the posture of a man too arrogant to realize how quickly his world could collapse. Jason waited until they were close, their laughter carrying through the busy terminal, oblivious to his presence. When they were just feet away, he stepped forward, blocking their path. "Jason?" Sophia's voice faltered, the smile slipping from her face. She glanced at Mark, whose confident smirk wavered under Jason's unflinching gaze. "We need to talk," Jason said firmly, his voice calm but commanding. "Right here!" Sophia glanced around nervously, clearly aware of the growing number of onlookers. "Jason, this isn't the place." "This is exactly the place," Jason interrupted, pulling the folder of evidence from under his arm. "You didn't think you'd leave without facing the consequences, did you?" He opened the folder and began speaking, his voice rising just enough to be heard by those nearby. "This," he said, holding up a printed email, "is your correspondence with Mark about this trip. And this," he continued, producing a receipt, "is the bill from that romantic weekend at the Lakeview Inn." Sophia's face drained of color as Jason methodically laid out the evidence. Mark shifted uncomfortably, his bravado evaporating. "Jason, please," Sophia whispered, her voice pleading now. "Let's go somewhere private." "No," Jason said, his eyes boring into hers. "You forfeited privacy when you planned to abandon our marriage in secrecy." A gasp rippled through the small crowd that had gathered, their curiosity piqued. Sarah stepped forward, her voice trembling but firm. "How could you do this, Sophia?" As the confrontation unfolded, Sophia's confident veneer crumbled. Mark muttered excuses and distanced himself, his loyalty evaporating under the weight of public scrutiny. Jason's calm, precise dismantling of their deception left them exposed and humiliated. When it was over, Jason stepped back, leaving them to grapple with their disgrace as the onlookers murmured among themselves. He had said his piece. It was time to walk away. Saturday morning arrived, the air at the bustling airport electric with the chatter of travelers. Jason sat on a sleek bench near the check-in counters, the folder of evidence secure in his bag. His demeanor was calm, almost detached, but his eyes flicked to the terminal entrance with an intensity that belied his outward appearance. Passengers wheeled luggage around him, oblivious to the storm about to unfold. Jason had chosen this setting for a reason. The public space wasn't just about humiliation. It was about making sure Sophia and Mark's betrayal couldn't hide in the shadows of denial. He didn't wait long. At precisely 7:10 a.m., Sophia strode into the terminal, her auburn hair shining in the morning light. She wore a beige trench coat over a chic travel ensemble, her every movement radiating confidence. Beside her walked Mark, tall and self-assured in his tailored blazer, his hand casually resting on the handle of a sleek suitcase. Jason watched them exchange a glance, a look of shared anticipation, and felt the final vestiges of his former life dissolve. This was the woman he had built a home with, the partner he had trusted implicitly. Now, she was a stranger. Standing, Jason approached them with a deliberate stride, Sophia's smile faltered the moment she saw him. Her step slowed and her grip on her bag tightened. "Jason," she said, her voice trembling despite the forced pleasantness. "What are you doing here?" Mark shifted, his posture stiffening. "We're in a bit of a hurry," he said brusquely, clearly uncomfortable. "Not as much of a hurry as you think," Jason replied. He pulled the folder from his bag, holding it firmly in front of him. "We need to talk." The tone of his voice, cold, controlled, cut through the ambient noise around them. A few heads turned, passengers pausing in their routines to watch the unfolding scene. Sophia glanced nervously at Mark, then back at Jason. "This isn't the place," she said, her voice now tinged with panic. "Oh, I think it is," Jason countered. "It's the perfect place for the truth." With that, he opened the folder, displaying the first page of the evidence. Emails, receipts, and photos stared back at Sophia and Mark like an indictment. Jason's voice remained steady as he began recounting their duplicity, laying out the timeline of their betrayal with precision. Sophia's face paled as she realized the extent of Jason's preparation. Mark, however, grew defensive. "This isn't what it looks like," he blurted out, his tone wavering. Jason raised an eyebrow. "Really? Because I have dozens of pages that say otherwise." By now the crowd around them had grown, a semicircle of onlookers bearing witness to the confrontation. Sophia stammered, her composure crumbling under the weight of Jason's accusations and the attention of strangers. "This was your choice, Sophia," Jason said quietly but firmly. "You betrayed me, and now you're going to face the consequences." The airport was silent, save for the murmurs of bystanders. The once confident pair stood frozen, their grand escape shattered before it could even begin. Jason stood motionless as Sophia and Mark wrestled with the weight of the evidence and the humiliation enveloping them. The bustling terminal, once filled with mundane chatter, had become a stage where betrayal and justice played out in real time. Jason, calm and unyielding, had delivered his final blow. Now, Sophia clutched her trench coat tightly, her fingers trembling. "Jason, please," she whispered, her voice thick with desperation. "This doesn't have to be like this. Let's talk. Just us." Jason met her pleading eyes with a cold, unwavering gaze. "Talk? The time for talking was before you decided to lie, cheat, and scheme your way out of our marriage." His voice carried no anger, only an unshakable finality. "You made your choices, Sophia. Now, you'll live with them." Mark, visibly flustered, interjected, his tone defensive. "You're blowing this out of proportion. Relationships are complicated, Jason. Things happen, feelings change." Jason's jaw tightened. "Feelings might change, but integrity doesn't. You didn't just betray me, you conspired to humiliate me, to steal from me. That's not love, Mark. It's cowardice." Around them, the crowd grew thicker, onlookers murmuring in disbelief. Some were recording the scene on their phones, their cameras capturing every nuance of Sophia and Mark's shame. The weight of the public spectacle was suffocating, and Sophia's face burned as she realized there was no escape from the judgmental eyes around her. Out of the corner of his eye, Jason spotted Sophia's parents, Sarah and Gerald, approaching. Their expressions oscillated between shock and fury, their pace quickening as they neared the confrontation. "Is it true?" Sarah demanded, her voice trembling with anger. "Sophia, tell me this isn't true." Sophia turned toward her mother, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Mom, I didn't mean for it to happen like this," she stammered. "You didn't mean for it to happen like this." Sarah's voice rose, sharp and unrelenting. "Do you have any idea what you've done? You've disgraced yourself, our family, and the man who stood by you for 15 years. Gerald, his usual stoic demeanor shattered, directed his gaze at Mark. "At you," he growled. "You're nothing but a parasite. You think you're some kind of charmer, don't you, taking what doesn't belong to you and leaving destruction behind?" Mark took a step back, his usual smug confidence completely eroded. "This is getting out of hand," he muttered, glancing around nervously as more bystanders began filming. "No, Mark," Jason said firmly, his voice cutting through the chaos. "This is accountability, something you clearly don't understand." The scene reached a fever pitch as security personnel arrived, alerted by the commotion. A uniformed officer approached, addressing Jason with professional concern. "Sir, is there a problem here?" Jason shook his head. "No problem, officer. Just finishing a long overdue conversation." Sophia, crumbling under the collective weight of her guilt and public humiliation, broke down in sobs. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I just wanted to be happy." Jason stared at her for a long moment, his face unreadable. "Happiness doesn't come at the expense of others, Sophia. You could have been honest. Instead, you chose deceit." He turned to the officer, his posture resolute. "I'm done here." He glanced back at Sophia and Mark one last time. "You've lost me, Sophia, and whatever fantasy you had with Mark, it ends here." With that, Jason walked away, his steps measured and purposeful. He felt the tension in his chest begin to loosen with each stride, a weight lifting from his shoulders. Behind him, he heard Gerald's booming voice continuing to berate Sophia and Mark, but Jason didn't look back. Outside the terminal, the crisp morning air filled his lungs. For the first time in weeks, Jason felt a sense of clarity, even hope. The betrayal had been devastating, but it hadn't broken him. If anything, it had reaffirmed his strength and his refusal to accept anything less than respect and honesty in his life. As he drove away, he thought about the future. He wasn't sure what it held, but he knew it would no longer be tied to lies and manipulation. He had faced the worst and come out standing. Now, it was time to rebuild. A life free from Sophia's shadow and filled with possibilities he hadn't yet imagined. For Jason, the chapter was closed, and he was ready to turn the page.